Jair, for the nice invitation. I am going to talk to you about ethical dilemmas in natural theology or valid inference in clinical trials. That is an anomaly that I'm not sure that people here consider to be an anomaly, but I will explain what it was. I work with statistics, with the theory of test of hypothesis, and with design of clinical trials. And you all know in the COVID-19 pandemics, people asked my help to design clinical trials for testing the efficiency and efficacy of hydroxychloroquine. That was a treatment promoted by Mr. Trump in the United States and by Mr. Bolsonaro in Brazil, and that proved to be a complete hoax. There are standard ways of designing clinical trials, and they are based in a golden standard of double-blind, randomized experiments. And of course, that's what I advise. And it seemed that we are headed this way, and then those ideas were rejected, and people decided that the patient should have the right to choose whatever they wanted, and that's of course a non-randomized, non-blind experiment that from a statistical point of view is useless. And that's very strange because this COVID-19 pandemics occurred between 2019 and 2021. And just before that, in Sao Paulo, we had a similar case that maybe you don't know because it was less known, at least outside Brazil, that some researchers at the University of Sao Paulo, not some, one researcher at the University of Sao Paulo, developed a treatment to cancer based on a substance called phosphoethanolamine. And that was promoted as a miracle wonder drug against cancer. That history, that anomalous history, I had no participation on that, but that developed between 2012 and 2017, just 2 years before the COVID pandemic. And it was an almost exact replica of the case of COVID-19. And that phosphoethanolamine case is a wonderful case study for this kind of anomalous behavior in science. We have recorded all the key depositions related to this case, some of them at the Senado Federal, at the public hearings at the upper house, at the Senate, at the upper house of the Brazilian Parliament, and they are bizarre. You have state attorneys explaining how to circumvent the law in public, in front of the cameras, at the floor of the Senate. You have scientists kneeling to the floor and praying to God for mercy for the patients. You have simple people from sometimes sick people saying, no, we need serious clinical trials, and because we really want to know if the thing works or not. And we have all the bizarre behaviors and arguments that you can imagine. good for studies in this kind of anomalies. I think this anomaly doesn't fall in the classification that Octavio presented, but it is an anomalous social behavior that is strongly related to science. So maybe it belongs to this conference, maybe not. I think it does, and it's an interesting case. So it involves the study. One more thing. It is interesting for me to study the role played by institutions. Just for you to know, the phosphoethanolamine case ended by the Senate, by the lower house and the upper house, approving a law stating that phosphoethanolamine is, by law, an acceptable treatment to cancer, and demanding that the University of São Paulo supply it to whoever wanted. So they completely bypassed all the legal procedures that we have in place. Are legal procedures that are regulated by Anvisa, that is the Brazilian equivalent of the NIH in the United States. And hydroxychloroquine was not that dramatic, but the end result was about the same. So I think that deserves serious study, because if we don't study it and understand it, we are bound to repeat the same story. After the phosphoethanolamine case ended, many people laughed at it, said how ridiculous it was, and I said, no, that's not quite right. It's not ridiculous. We shouldn't cancel what happened. We shouldn't ignore it. We better study what happened there, because if we don't understand, we are bound to repeat it another time. And the other time came very quickly, and we repeated exactly the same story. And after the COVID pandemic, people again dismissed it. That's just Bolsonarian politics, and with a very superficial analysis of what happened, without really understanding the psychological and political factors involved. I was in the middle of it, and I know that it's not just politics, much more involved. There is a component that has to do with statistics. This idea of double-blind randomized experiment is very counterintuitive, very pathetic to ignore patients' right if it is indispensable. So for you to take a nice medicine from Bayesian statistics or from the American Statistical Association and throw it to the public, that doesn't work. That cannot be digested. So we ought to find way to explain to the public and do it in advance in disaster or anomalous event is religion. Religious arguments were used all the way to some behaviors that are strange. And I think we cannot ignore those arguments. We cannot ignore things that those religious arguments express, deeming them unimportant, because they resonate, they capture, they mobilize social and political forces. So we ought to understand them and engage with them in a meaningful way. Otherwise, we will not be able to control them. And we are bound to repeat the same story again. Randomized clinical trials, as I already hinted, imply very serious and non-trivial ethical decisions. What basically happens is there is the ethics of medicine that people are very familiar, and the ethics of scientific inquiry. That's a very different ethics. The physician should seek the good of the patient. The scientist should seek truth, and they are not the same thing. When we design an ethical medical trial, clinical trial, we seek truth. And if a physician says, I know what's best for my patient, we have to tell him, no, you don't. If you did, there will be no need for a clinical trial. But that is very difficult to do. And we ought to learn how to explain those things to the general public, to the political class, and start doing it proactively. Otherwise, we are going to have further anomalies. Yeah? And we have to engage with all these players, with all these forces in a meaningful way. There's just been published in Brazil a book that's called Que Bobagem. I don't know if you heard of this book. It's by a woman called Pasternak. I don't remember her first name. Natalia Pasternak. She's a brilliant scientist. She presents her arguments very clearly. Everything that she says is fine, but she completely dismisses non-scientific arguments that were at play in this process. And I think that's a very, although scientifically absolutely correct, it is a path that is going to fail, because it's not going to convince anyone besides the scientists that are already convinced. So, this is a problem that I'm studying. I'm just beginning to study. That's work in progress. But if it interests you, something that I'm starting to do now, a project that I'm starting now. And how much time do I have?
15 minutes.
15 minutes. So I'm going to give you a very quick introduction to randomization in clinical trials. Randomization is something weird, right? Why should we make a decision depend on the roll of the dice and not on a deterministic decision process? Well, there are several answers to that. All true. Because ritual require them for supernatural manifestation, because of old costumes and traditions, as well as by contemporary laws, and by the gold standard of blind and randomized trials. The pictures here show the ship Argos from the Odyssey, And at some point, the Argonauts have to face a dangerous situation, and one of them is going to be the hero. No one wants to be the hero because it's very dangerous stuff. And how they decide? They cast guys, because that's a fair way to here we have the Yoruba traditions of there is a god that
Excuse me, but your audio is very, very low, and you listen far away.
linked to this process. It's called Rumila or Iqua. And we are fortunate because those traditions are very alive in Brazil.
Can you hear us? Yeah. Excuse me, but your audio is very, very low, and you listen far away. We can hear you good. We cannot hear you good or fine.
Hello, hello. Can you hear me now?
Huh? We hear you, but very, very low.
Hello, hello, hello. Can you hear me? No.
No, maybe the microphone has not battery.
No. We have changed it already.
Hello.
Yes. Oh, yeah. Now we'll listen you very clear.
Okay.
Just wait a second then. You're right.
While the Greek traditions are lost. Concerning Greek traditions, it is very interesting that all juries in ancient Greece were selected randomly. But there is they worked in a very different way than modern juries. In a modern juries, jurors are supposed to debate until they reach a consensus. It's a very good film, a very good movie about that. That's 12 Angry Men. In Greek juries, they were forbidden to discuss. They were all supposed to cast independent votes according to their own knowledge of the law. And that they should arrive at a wrong by a kind of statistical asymptotic convergence process. Of course, they didn't use that language then. Sortitions were also used in Hebrew, in ancient Jewish religion, and they give in the Bible there is a explanation of why to do that, and the explanation is very close to modern statistical theory. They say casting the dice puts judgment's quarrel to rest and keeps essential powers separated. The key there is keeping essential powers separated. Here you have even older tradition from Egypt. You have two balances, two scales being used. The scale of merchants weighing gold to pay for goods, and the scale of Maat, that is the goddess of justice. And in the middle is a symbol of corruption. Is mixing, is confounding the two scales, trading gold for justice, confounding essential powers. The use of sortition keeps distinct powers separated. That's why you choose jurors at random. That's why you make some decisions randomized. And that's why you use a randomization in clinical trials. That's a famous example of a statistical, of the so-called confounding effects in clinical trials. There is a new drugs, a new drug for a severe disease that was being tried, but the physician responsible for the trial knew that the disease was much more serious for women than for men. So she gave the new treatment. He didn't believe it worked. Almost only to men, only a few women. In that decision that was very ethical from a medical point of view, was very unethical from a scientific point of view, because it created a confounding effect between the response variable and one of the covariates. And if you analyze the data, you come to the conclusion that the new treatment is good for women, or is bad for women, is bad for men, and good for everybody. And here you have in graphical form the explanation for that. How to avoid that? Randomizing. Some in the event that I participated, some physicians came to me very angry and told me, you cannot dismiss my input because I kind of know if that treatment is going to be good for that patient or that other patient. And I told him, I believe you. It is exactly because your input can be useful that I must ignore it. Because that intuitive knowledge that you have will create a confounding effect and nullify the utility of the clinical trial from a statistical point of view. So, how much time do I have? 5 minutes. You already have the picture. I have some history of clinical trials, how this idea of randomized experiment slowly emerged. It was controversial from the start. The initial proponent of this idea is a guy that is dear to all the logical community. That's Charles Sanders Peirce. He proposed in 1885. He published a paper with his student, Joseph Jastrow, that's a famous psychologist in the National Academy of Science. And his proposal was completely ignored. People laughed at it. What's a stupid idea? Use a deck of cards. That's the randomization device that he used to decide on a scientific experiment. The idea was picked up about 50 years later by Ronald Fisher, and he used for testing different kinds of fertilizers in agriculture, an application that was far less controversial. And the idea was accepted and it became the accepted standard for statistical experiments. I have an extensive, I published dozens of articles in theory of statistical test of hypothesis, and also some nice, I think they're nice, articles on the randomization, how to do clinical trials, doing the randomization in smart ways so that you can reduce the number of the participants in the trial and come to the conclusions more quickly. That's very important from an ethical point of view, but requires some very sophisticated theory in this process of randomization to design clinical trials. So it's a nice field of research, and if some of you are interested, we can talk about it later. Thank you.